Every practice says they put patients first. But if you're honest, how many really back it up in a way where patients can feel from the first phone call to years after treatment that they're put first? Well, in this episode, I'm sitting down with Tom Gonzalez, who's a business facilitator at Ohana Dental Implant Centers. And he reveals how a practice can hardwire family level care into its DNA while running like a finely tuned business. In his COO-style role, Tom aligns marketing, patient experience, and operations so that every single touch point delivers on their promise, and patients notice this. You'll hear the story of a patient who drove hours to fix a failed implant, why Ohana's approach keeps their standards higher than most, and how they use curiosity, empathy, and team empowerment as growth tools, not just feel-good buzzwords. And we also dig into the systems behind their success, the technology that keeps standards consistent, the training that elevates every single team member, and the leadership philosophies that make Ohana, which is the Hawaiian word for family, more than just a brand name. So if you want to see how a practice can deliver exceptional care, inspire patient loyalty, and grow without losing itself, this episode is a blueprint worth studying. So if you want your practice to be the one patients can't stop talking about, listen into this episode right now. All right, we'd like to welcome our guest, Tom Gonzalez, business facilitator from Ohana Dental Implant Centers. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you for having me here.
No, yeah, thank you for being a part of the podcast. I wanted to ask you, business facilitator for Ohana Dental Implant Centers, what does that mean?
What it means in our work is that we're not a big box office. We have 3 locations, a couple doctors. So in our case, a business facilitator is just that catch-all role that has a focus on how do we make sure that we're delivering the patient experience at a level that will help us grow our business in the years ahead. And so in some instances, it could be a focus on marketing. In some instances, it can be a focus on when the patient is in the office. It's kind of broad.
Gotcha. So you're more so like the operations side of the whole practice?
Yes.
Gotcha. Interesting. So like a COO for Ohana Dental Implant Centers.
Yeah. Some people will refer to it as that. Yeah.
Nice. So Tom, real quick, if your patients could only use one word to describe their experience at Ohana Dental Implants, what word would you hope they'd choose and why?
Oh, thank you.
Nice. Why?
The reason why is patients could go to a number of different places. When patients come to us, in a lot of cases, it's because they've had issues with dental implant treatments in the past. Maybe the way it was done, now they have to have a revision because 3 to 5 years later, the implant failed. And so they'll come to us and then we'll look at a treatment plan that helps correct that. That's one example. Another example is patients that come to us are aware that there may be little tweaks along the way. The process is always kind of a living process. So you get your implants, it's not the end. There are things that can happen afterwards. And so any little step that can vary from the original treatment, like, oh, I didn't expect this to happen. Okay, well, let's come in and take a look at that. And then we address it right away. And the patient isn't paying anything extra for that in most cases. So we try to make sure that when we talk to the patient about what the cost of treatment will be, that we honor that and that we deliver a standard that enables them to feel like, I spent my money and I got what I expected to pay for. We have patients coming back and saying, you know what, thank you. I never expected this level of service. So that's been helpful and a trademark of what we do.
Nice. So can you tell me one patient story or moment in your practice that genuinely moved you and reaffirmed why you do what you do?
Oh, goodness. We have a patient that traveled a few hours away to see us, and he basically came with his prosthetic in his hand and said, this is what I ended up with, and I need to get this fixed, and how are you guys going to fix it? And without the understanding that, well, there's a lot that goes into that because we have to know what kind of implant was used. Sometimes the way the implants are placed may vary from one dentist to the next. And so there's a lot of information that we need to be able to address a revision like that. But the process took several months. And by the end of the process, we were able to fix the problem. He noticed a big difference in how it felt afterwards. This is a little over a year ago, so there's still, what could happen next? And he left happy. and excited that even though he'd spent money before and having to spend money again because of the experience that happened before, that this time it's going to work. And so we'll see 5 years from now, if there's an issue that resulted from the treatment because of the warranty we have, are we able to address that is going to be the question in his mind. And our goal is to deliver on that.
Interesting. So towards the end of the process, he loved it and everything like that. But he's also thinking of, like, is this going to last me past the 5 years, like the warranty?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of that comes just with the experience of the doctor. And so the doctor was able to let him know, look, this is why your implant failed and you're experiencing this, this, and this. And what we do is, or our approach is, and he can talk from a level of authority and experience because of our track record. And so the patient felt very comfortable that, you know what, this time it's going to work because it's an approach that this doctor has a track record for delivering. So he felt good about it and was able to spend the money, and he's doing well now.
Awesome, man. So let's get into the operational DNA of the practice. So like if an outsider spent a day observing your practice, what's one subtle yet powerful interaction they'd see between your team and patients that most practices overlook completely?
I think one thing they'll notice that we get feedback on is just our level of curiosity. And what I mean by that is that sometimes when you go to a dental office, and it's different when you look at general dentistry and even specialty dentistry. But even then, sometimes the way of doing business with the patient carries over. And when I say curious, what I mean by that is that our staff is trained to be inquisitive enough about the patient to understand not just what they're experiencing in terms of the symptoms, but how that's having an impact on them. And so we'll often have patients that I didn't expect to be talking about this, or oh, no one's ever really asked me that before. Or I didn't expect that I'd come and you would have a solution ready for me that actually addresses some of the concerns I had. So that's the feedback we get. And it's all based off of the training that we have with our staff to be curious enough to ask the kinds of questions that normally don't get asked in a treatment.
So then, Tom, what training, like, can you give me like, I guess, script or examples of like, what do the questions look like?
Sure, absolutely. So for example, just over the phone, the intake can sometimes feel a little bit prescriptive. And in our case, we want to be curious off the bat, especially if they're in person or if we have a phone appointment that's scheduled with us. You know, hey, I noticed on the survey you filled out that you've got XYZ. Tell me a little bit more about that. So we try to find out the scope of service. But beyond that, there's a lot that has to do with the tonality of and how we pace the questions and how the language comes across. And are we using language that gets them to be resistant, or does the language we use and the tonality actually help them feel like they can share details with us that help us get into what the problem actually is? So language would be, well, if this has been happening for the last 5 years, what's different now? You've come and you're wanting to address this now. Oh, okay. And where you've been dealing with for 5 years, how's that been having an impact on you? Has there been a time when you haven't been able to do this? Oh, and where's that showing up on a day-to-day basis? Is that something you want to change? So questions like that just feel like we're connecting with them make a huge difference. And then their guard starts to come down and we're really able to get into the problem. And then when we talk about the treatment, it's easier for them to see that the treatment will actually solve the problem that they have. So that happens when we do an intake for new patients. The treatment coordinator gets on the phone with them. And then when they're in the consultation, we address things that way as well.
Nice. That's pretty brilliant. The tone you mentioned, pretty much, should it always be like a warm tone? Or do you feel there's times where a different tone would be best for this type of conversion?
That's a great question. I think in the beginning, the tone changes throughout the call. You'll use a different kind of tonality with like an A-type personality. They have different expectations, and there's a different level of status that would impact how you deal with that versus someone that isn't like an A-type. As the call progresses, we get enough information to where we can be more firm. So at the end of the consultation, we can be a little bit more bold. You know, what happens, and I'm saying this out of concern for you because we see patients all the time that come in. What happens if you've been dealing with this for the last 5 years, you don't get this treatment, and now you're having to go back, and 6 months from now, your teeth deteriorate more. What happens at that point? And that's where we get, I hadn't really thought about that, or no one's really asked me that. You know, willing to settle for that. And the most important about that is it's not so much scripted as it is our people have to actually feel that. Because if they don't feel that, if you don't have the concern for that patient that you're on their side and you're helping them like you would maybe a family member, it's not going to translate and it'll feel fake. But
Mm.
at the end of the day, if you're really going to help someone through the kind of transformation that allows them to commit to pay 15, 20, $40,000, they've got to feel that. And the training is to help facilitate that.
Interesting. I like that a lot. So, do you recommend, Tom, that everyone in the front desk study up on personalities?
I think that it's helpful. The important thing is, like when you say study up with personalities, there's a lot of information out there that you can glean from about different types of personalities. And I think on the surface, that's helpful. When you're dealing with people on a regular basis, is that training or that knowledge going to be able to translate enough quickly so that
Mhm.
people are putting in the reps? And how does it actually sound when I do that? And are people getting the kind of feedback that they need to make adjustments quickly? Or do they, hey, I'm using these things I learned about personality and there's not enough information there for it to be effective?
No, that's good. I like that. How quickly it can translate. That's true. It's over the phone. It needs to be
Yes,
super fast.
exactly.
Yeah. So then, what unconventional operational habit do you personally practice daily that consistently leads to better patient outcomes or team harmony?
Me personally, one thing I've learned when I first came to, and I don't know that it's unconventional, maybe it's unconventional for me, but my experience may not be too different than a lot of people that are in the same role. But I used to come into the office in a support role, and sometimes there'd be so many things on my mind. And Dr. Shiona would say, hey, you know what? The assistants are asking, what's going on with Tom? Like, he just seems like there's something heavy about, and it wasn't so much that there was this heaviness, but I failed to engage appropriately because I let myself get distracted by all the things I needed to do in the day. So that feedback was critical for me to reflect and think, okay, when I go in, people are going to feed off that energy. And so how can I engage with them? So I try to make sure every time I'm in the office and I'm engaging in a way that help people feel that one, they have my support, that I can offer solutions or help them arrive at solutions, and that I'm willing to listen so that one, they'll share the information that can help us collaborate well together. And two, they feel like they can give me feedback so that they can be open to feedback when I have to give them training feedback.
Interesting. So, walk me through that, Tom. How does that look? How do you show that you can offer or help them reach to a solution when you're engaging with them?
One important thing that sometimes get overlooked is just setting the expectation up front.
Mhm.
So I've already had discussions with employees that, look, we're in a feedback environment. That's part of our culture. So I'm open to feedback, and I hope that you're open to feedback, and feedback helps us. And so we have that kind of discussion foundationally to set the expectation.
Mhm.
And so then when I go in and we've talked about problem solving, and I'll say, look, can I offer my perspective to help lower that? Can I offer kind of what I think about what's going on so that they still feel empowered? Before that, I'll be listening to what they say. I'll ask questions instead of assuming right away that I have the solution. Questions help me get information, but the questions also help them think about their part in the solution. So yeah, I would say set the foundation of what the expectation is for solving problems as a team, and then referring back to those. Well, have we talked to the other assistant about this? Or who have you talked to about this?
Mhm.
Also, the first person that you're sharing this with? Oh, okay. Well, how do you think it would be received if you talked to Dr. Shinoda, shared this with him? What do you think you might say? And so that's my approach anyway, to help empower our people based off of a standard that we have to solve problems.
I love that. I had a mentor one time. Every time we would like go to them and say like, "Hey man," like for example, the assistant, right? "Hey man, the assistant's telling me this and that, and I don't agree." And then they would say, "Oh snap! Well, what did they say when you told them that?" And I'm like, "Well, I haven't went to them." And I'm like, "Maybe," and that let me know, right? Like, I should go approach them in a nice way, right? Obviously, see what it says instead of me just trying to go to Tom all the time, and now Tom has to deal with that all the time on top of other things. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
thought that's interesting. So then with the feedback, you mentioned we're in a feedback environment. What's one brutally honest piece of feedback you've gotten about the practice that initially hurt, but later turned into pure gold?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. The first thing that comes to mind, there's a lot of feedback that we're going to get that can be very constructive. But there's one thing that comes to mind because it really helped show our team, or we were able to utilize it and make it powerful. You often have vendors or peers that come from outside the state that are interested in what Dr. Siona does. And even more than being impressed by the techniques he uses or whatever, most of the feedback that we get is about the team. Like, how do you do this? How is it that your team is able to respond? Or how are they doing it at this level? Or why is it that they're all working together well? And so the way we've been able to use that is to talk about it, because usually the feedback will come to the dentist or to myself. If we bury that and we don't talk about it, then there's no value in the feedback actually creating more value. Dr. Sion has been very intentional in saying, hey, we got this feedback. And when I talk about it, I say, hey, we got this feedback. Now, we know why that is, don't we? Well, yeah. Why do you think we're getting this feedback? Well, it's because, and we try to tie it back to the standards that we have. So I guess my point is that looking for opportunities to take the feedback and then bringing it back to, if it's an individual or if it's the entire team, talking about it, evaluating, well, what does this mean that we're getting this feedback? Well, it means this. Oh, we're on track. Okay, well, how do we maintain that momentum? What happens if someday we get different kind of feedback or we're not getting the same feedback that we're getting now? What does that mean? Well, maybe we need to take a step back and evaluate, are we doing the same things that we've been doing, or do we need to improve? So that's how we dealt with that kind of feedback.
Interesting. So then when you get this positive or negative feedback, do you do it during a morning huddle when you discuss it, a team meeting, or just one-on-one? Like, let's just say, Tom, you did fantastic. Everybody's talking about you. Do you discuss that amongst all the peers and everybody? Like everybody, Tom's saying he's doing great, or how do you do it?
There are a few different ways that we do it. There's spaces of downtime where people are in the break room and Dr. Siona is there. And that's always a perfect opportunity to say, hey, this, or, someone brought food and we talk about it because everyone's there. Or in the morning meetings that we do, we slip it in. Or on one-on-ones, those are perfect, sometimes overlooked opportunities, because then you're getting the engagement of the individual. Hey, Rebecca, so what did you think about what Dr. Siona was saying about this? Yeah, hey, I've noticed that when you're dealing with patients, you're doing this really well. And I think that's had an impact on the kind of feedback that we're getting. So there's a range of opportunities that we try to take advantage of at the team level, finding those opportunities, but then on an individual level too, so that each individual feels like they're individually invested in that.
I like that a lot. So amongst everyone and individually, and positive feedback too, right? Even if it's anything, you kind of discuss it and dissect it. So then let's talk about some silent metrics. So tell me about one surprising, non-obvious metric you track obsessively. Maybe one most practices probably ignore, but that directly correlates with your practice, exceptional patient reviews or profitability.
Okay. One thing, and we use CallRail for this. I don't know that it's that unconventional, but we look at the time of the call. There's kind of a sweet spot for how long a call should take. If it's too short, that's where we go in and investigate. And I wouldn't say there's like a tracked metric in terms of 78% of our calls were within this time frame, but it is kind of a flagging method that we use. If the call is really short, that's kind of a flag to go in and understand why. The call was really long. Well, what was it about that call that made it 25 minutes? And CallRail is excellent for that because we can look at the transcription, we can hear the recording, we can see the feedback that was given from the AI function in that. So we have so many different ways to evaluate the calls, and that opens the door for us to give feedback. Hey, you notice when the prospect said this, you jumped right away to this. So there was some resistance on the call, and they tried to back out of the call too quickly rather than set an appointment. And that's why the call was so short. Or you notice how we spent 25 minutes, but we didn't land an appointment. In this part, when you were talking about this, we kind of got off track and we lost some momentum. And then we answered questions a certain way. And so we missed that opportunity. We spent 25 minutes doing it, and we make those little tweaks.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. Involving CallRail especially has been extremely helpful to be able to do that. And this is a silent metric because if it's 20% of calls, we start to look at, 20%. Well, what does that mean? What's the behavior underneath that? And let's dig into the behavior, because if we're going to impact a metric, we need to understand what's going on so we can shift it.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating you're using CallRail for this What were you doing before, I guess, the situation, or were you guys kind of more lost, or how did that look?
I'd say we were lost. Even when we started using CallRail, it was mostly just to listen to calls. And then when I came in,
Hmm.
we started to uncover other things that we can do. Hey, we can assign different numbers to different media sources, and we can track where we're getting the most volume of calls. And then it was, oh goodness, with the AI, we can set up automation so that without having to manually tag a call, now I know when it's a new patient call without even listening to the call, because I can go in and create an automation that will look for certain things in the call that will flag it or tag it as a new patient. And that saves me a lot of time, and it saves Dr. Shion a lot of time. And so you can just go through the list of calls and say, okay, well, that's a new patient call, that's a new patient call. And we're able to do it in a way that really doesn't leave anything falling through the cracks.
So with CallRail, what were some things that you guys uncovered and you're like, oh snap? I know you mentioned duration, which is huge because I guess now is there like a sweet spot or like, hey, if it's 3 minutes, perfect. If it's 25 minutes, that's a red flag. What would be too short? 5 seconds or 10 seconds? What have you been noticing as trends?
So the sweet spot for us takes into account that it's not just about setting up an appointment. We need to make a connection with them, because if we set up the appointment, they could have gone anywhere and set up an appointment. But was there enough of a connection, enough curiosity on their part to say, yeah, I'm excited to go to Ohana for my appointment? And so they're more likely to show up. So it has to be long enough for that. Usually that can be 4 or 5 minutes. I would say a cutoff would be more than 9 minutes.
Hmm.
But it's not unusual to be on a call like that. I would say if we were to improve it all, we would try to shorten that so it's somewhere between maybe 3 and 7 minutes tops.
Interesting. Okay. I like that. Getting the feel of the caller, right? That way they're excited because anybody could just book an appointment.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And then if we're looking at our show rate has to reflect that, well, what happened? Why was our show rate so low? Well, maybe it's so low because X, Y, Z, but no, wait a minute. What if we listen to the calls or if we look at the transcript, what's going on in the calls that might trigger some resistance? Maybe that's the reason why our show rate's down, not maybe these other things that we'll conventionally look at.
That's interesting. It's fascinating you mentioned that because so many practices still overlook how much critical insight is hiding in their call data. And that right there is why the best practices aren't just guessing where the cracks are. They're looking at the data and fixing issues before they cost real money. And honestly, that's exactly why I love CallRail. It's not just a call tracking tool. It's like having a performance coach sitting in on every single patient call without you having to be there. And here's the thing, with CallRail, you can literally see which marketing source brought in the call, how long the conversation lasted, what was said, and where in the call your team either built trust or lost the patient. Then, and this is my favorite part, they'll actually guide you on your own metrics so you know exactly where to improve. So you're not just getting a random report, you're being guided throughout this process to know what to increase and what to decrease. So instead of wondering, are our calls too short, too long? Are we missing opportunities? You'll know, and you'll know fast enough to fix it. And right now, CallRail is giving our listeners a free 14-day trial, plus coaching throughout this whole process on your metrics and how to make them better. So if you want clarity on your marketing ROI and a plan to improve your patient conversions, head to callrail.com or go in the show notes below and click on the first link in the show notes below to learn more. All right, let's get back to it. When it comes to invisible breakdowns, Tom, from your perspective, what's one hidden operational issue that quietly damages patient retention or profitability over time? And how do you spot it early?
I would say the biggest thing is just consistency. So every office is going to have certain standards. Ours surrounding our new patients has a lot to do with that interaction with them. So if I'm at the front desk taking the calls and I haven't asked enough questions to determine what the scope of service is, for example, we're fee for service and we submit to insurances, but we're not like insurance driven.
Mm-hmm.
So if the front desk slips from the standard that we have, do you guys take Aetna insurance? If they say, well, we really don't take any insurances, or no, we don't take Aetna, we don't have enough information to determine whether we can still help them. Well, tell me, why is that a concern to you? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, oh, okay. Or taking it back to, well, a lot of it depends on the treatment that you're looking for. What is it exactly you're looking for? Or tell me what's going on with your teeth so I can get a better understanding of what coverage would be available for you. So
Hmm.
there's a standard for that. And if we get a little bit lazy, and then if no one helps enforce the standard, over time, it can start to become the norm. I would say a lack of consistency in enforcing standards is probably the biggest thing that can break success over time.
How often do you have to enforce the standard? Is it something that you're telling your team, like, hey, you've been here, you should get it by now? Or is it like, oh man, I've been lacking the enforcement of the standard?
Yeah, we try to do that on a weekly basis. Our approach usually is when I'm listening to the calls, I've noticed this on a few of the calls, like what's happened? Oh, well, it gets really busy. Oh, like what's coming up? How we talked about problem solving
Yeah.
before. And so that's the approach that we would use. And the funny thing is that over time, what happens, the more regular we do that, you almost just have to raise your eyebrows a little bit.
Yeah.
And they know, oh, Tom's going to talk to me about this. So they start to self-enforce a lot better. And it's all done in the spirit because we've set the expectation up front that this is in the spirit of their own development as a team member. And you know what? These are life skills that we give them, how to communicate better, how to be inquisitive, how to ask questions. And so when we frame it that way for them, the feedback we're giving them is for their development. It's not just because, hey, you got to meet the standard. And if you don't, you know,
Interesting. I like how it's weekly. And then you kind of probe into it a little bit more. So then I guess with that being said, you're creating the standard, you're making it happen. It's an invisible breakdown, right? You're trying to make sure you're enforcing it as much as you possibly can when it comes to performing the best over the phone. And you utilize call rail to also listen in on the phone conversation?
absolutely. As soon as the call drops in the call rail, I can go in and listen to it. Like my day may be, I'm going to spend today listening to calls and I want to be able to give some feedback to this treatment coordinator, or that treatment coordinator. Sometimes Dr. Sion will be driving back from one of our locations, which is about an hour away, and he'll listen to calls while he's in the car. And then
Hmm.
he'll call me and say, hey, Tom, I noticed, did you hear that call that we took around 11 o'clock today? Oh, yeah, I did. Or, oh, no, I haven't listened to that yet. And so we'll start to talk about it so that both of us from both ends can help enforce the standards that we're trying to keep.
Nice. That's good, man. So that's like 24/7 or a lot of work, right? Always listening to it and then brainstorming on how to improve it and things like that. It's
Yeah.
good. It's good. Can you describe a moment when choosing the well-being of your team or patients clearly costs the practice money in the short term, but paid back exponentially later?
I would say that Dr. Siona has a relentlessness for getting work done right. And I think that's his own personal standard. There's a nice story behind that. But there are times when we'll hear patients, you know what, I went and my implant's failing and they said that I've got to pay extra. They said, well, have you gone back to them? Why don't you just go back to them and they should be able to fix that? And sometimes we'll encourage them to do that because the dentist owns the work that they do. And that's the
Mhm.
belief that we have. So there have been times when Dr. Shiona could have billed a patient for additional work. Remember, he's been continuously developing his own craft. And so there are times when we could have charged for soft tissue work. This is in the past that we do that actually has a huge impact on the viability of implants. But he knew that people don't understand why the soft tissue is so important. There might be some resistance in the price, and there's a cost of learning how to do it. And so for a while, he wouldn't charge the cost of doing the soft tissue augmentation. And so we could deliver that value to the patient, and it enabled him to do more reps in developing that part of his craft. So now when patients come to us and we talk about soft tissue, they understand why it's important. Now we're able to charge that as part of the treatment because he does it with a high level of expertise. But for some time, we had to forego being able to do that just so he could get the reps in.
I get that a lot. Interesting. So then, Tom, for you, what's your internal decision-making filter or question that helps you balance profit versus people every time?
For me, the question is always, how do I solve the short-term part of this problem today while keeping in mind the long-term outcome of whatever the issue might be? The reasoning behind that question that I ask is that people aren't always patient for the long-term outcome. So
Hmm.
you have to solve something now or today, but you're not going to solve the long-term outcome today. So how do you make some kind of concession that helps alleviate what's going on now without compromising the long-term outcome? So a lot of that involves crucial conversations with whoever you're dealing with. When you're asking about process, that's the process I use. And that starts with that question. How do I take care of today and be mindful of the long-term outcome?
I like that. I like that a lot. All right. So when it comes to marketing, now I know you closely track every single marketing lead. I believe you even use CallRail for this, right? A lot of the times. What was the single most surprising discovery you made about marketing ROI from carefully tracking every call and lead? Something that completely shifted your marketing strategy.
So the key metric that we look at, that we always have our eye on, is our close rate. Once the patient's in the chair, how effective are we at helping them make a commitment to treatment so they don't continue dealing with the same issue they've been dealing with? Because once they cross that line, it's a whole new world from them. And, our patients that have had work done can tell us stories. So with that being a key metric, our closing rate started to go down. And our first thought was, it's got to be because of the economy. It's
Yeah.
harder to get financing now than it used to be before. And so people are more resistant. And that's true. You can certainly see that. Go to CallRail, look and see, is there anything different? Well, our show rates tend to be a little bit lower and the quality of the leads isn't as strong. And so seeing it from that perspective, we thought, well, what if that's something to do with our messaging? That's something that we can tweak. So let's look at, and it was at the beginning of the year, I think our close rate was like 18%. This year, we need to be really focused on elevating the doctor's authority. Well, how are we going to do that? It needs to be in our messaging, the Facebook messages. Well, how do we do that? Well, we've got articles that have been written by magazine publications that are focused on his work. Okay, we need to make sure that we're highlighting those. We need to be very assertive in how we speak to healthcare providers in the area, because a lot of times the referrals come from them.
Yeah.
If another doctor or a nurse or someone in healthcare says, you know what, I've heard some really good things about Dr. Siona, they tend to have a little more authority and credibility because they're in the healthcare industry. And so one change that we made this year was being focused on elevating his authority, and that started with a whole different message, because we didn't talk about it a lot. And so people may not have seen him in a vast sea of dental implant providers as someone that has experience, as someone that has a strong track record. So we really had to put that up front. What that's translated into is that we're seeing more referrals come from, as opposed to say like our Facebook or Google advertising, now we're starting to see more referrals come in, and our close rate has increased from about 18% at the beginning of the year. Right now we're at about 23% year to date, which is a good increase. And we're attributing that in big part to a change in the message. And then again, how we talk about that in our conversations with patients, whether in the consultation, especially, when people come to us, it's because Dr. Sion's been doing this for 10 years. Or when we come to us, it's because it's hard to find a dentist that doesn't just do all on fours, tops and bottoms. When people come to us, it's because we have financing or giving payment options. And it's easy for us to do because Dr. Sion's been doing this for a long time. So little things like that help elevate his authority. And at the end of the day, when people are making that decision, one of the questions they have is, you know what, this sounds all good, but do I really trust what the doctor's going to do? Because I've heard horror stories, and I make sure I'm not one of those, because I don't want to pay $20,000, $30,000 again. They can fall back on his authority in the industry. One more thing about that that's really interesting is that sometimes our own associates, our own employees, you have to pitch it to them. And sometimes it's been at events. So Dr. Sionen, he'll take the entire team to do training, or he'll invest in their development. We started doing photography, went to Scottsdale, Arizona for a course and took a few assistants so they could learn how to do the professional photography. And I was a part of that. And they're like, oh, wow, I've never had an employer do this for me before. And then they come back and train the team. And then while we're away, they'll see him interact with other peers, and other peers are like, oh, wow, Dr. Siona, Dr. Siona. And so when they see that, it really helps them understand what his authority is in the industry, which helps them feel more confident when they have to talk to the patient about what he does.
I like that. And that's a metric I have never thought of, that you can see through, I guess, with CallRail, or you translate that to more authority. You know what I mean? That's an interesting metric. So awesome. For everyone listening, that's exactly why having something like CallRail is so powerful. You instantly see what's working, what's wasting money, and you gain total clarity on your marketing ROI. It just removes the guesswork completely. So if you're not already using CallRail, it's practically a no-brainer. So if you want, go in the show notes below and click on the first link in the show notes below to check out CallRail. Now, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, when it comes to scaling, as the practice has grown, what's one thing, like a specific system or key hire, you wish you had put in place sooner to avoid those growing pains?
Rather than maybe looking back, I would say where we're at right now, like with the advent of AI, the possibilities are amazing. And I know it may not answer your question directly, but as I'm looking to the future and growth into the future, one of our charges, how do we implement the AI technology to automate what we do without compromising the in-person interaction that really drives the quality of our business? Because it's possible to implement AI, and at the end of the day, you've automated the very things that diminish the value that you want to have, the in-person interactions. So if there was a system we could have introduced sooner, gosh, if we had been using what we're doing right now with CallRail maybe 3 years ago, the same way we're using it now, that could have saved us a ton of time and a ton of guesswork. And I think we'd be in even a better position than we are now to deal with some of the changes that we're seeing as AI is integrated into CallRail, which I'm excited to see what happens in the next 3-6 months as CallRail continues to add AI layers to the solution that they have.
Nice. I like that. So then how do you differentiate that, Tom, where it's like, hey, we thought we were automating this, but in fact, it's harming the human-to-human interaction kind of a thing? What differentiated us? Like, how can you tell before you actually see the damage done? Or is there a way you can tell before you see the damage done?
I think some things are intuitive. For example, now you can have an AI basically take the call, and it can be automated, it can be in the background, and there are tools to do that. I haven't really looked into CallRail for that, but in the CRM we use, there are other solutions out there to do that. And my first impression is, oh, this would be great because then we could make sure we capture every call. That's my first impression. My next thought is, well, how's that really going to impact how people respond to that? Well, I don't know. What do we do? Do we test it? Well, let's test it. We're not quite that far yet, but that would be my next step. We'll make a small investment. We'll see how people respond to it. Or let's do some due diligence and see, are there resources we can look to see how people are responding to that in a healthcare setting, would be some of the due diligence we do to preemptively prevent integrating a system. Or is there a system out there that delivers a better, like there's some AIs that are more like chatbots, and there are other AIs that are programmed to be able to have a more real interaction. And so we're in a space right now where we're kind of watching to see. We haven't really implemented anything that could answer calls right away because we know there's some limitations, but we're always on the lookout for something that could really add value alongside what we're already doing in person or live with a human.
Interesting. I like that. I like that a lot. So then, real quick, leadership blind spots. If you could give yourself a quick heads up 5 years ago about a leadership pitfall, what would you say?
Oh, trying to do everything myself, for sure. I came with the charge of implementing systems that help us refine our operations. And a lot of that was, I would spot issues. I thought, well, I'm going to create a system for this or an automation for this that can take care of it to solve the problem instead of empowering the employee to do it. And it would be a little thing. And even with all the training I had, and I already knew, sometimes we slip into those leadership traps where, no, I need to empower. Oh, but I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
They're missing this. Well, I'll step in and that'll help them. And then they don't have to worry about it. So that used to happen more early on. And I think as I started to remember the impact it's had in my past as a leader, I had to pick myself up quick and just really cling to this notion that if I try to do everything myself, I'm robbing that opportunity for them. And not just the opportunity, but the responsibility. And I can't take everything on. And if this is continuous, then it's going to be normal for them. And then when I need to say, hey, why aren't you doing this? Or, oh, I can't do this, I need to delegate it. This has never been an issue before. And now I've created an issue where the expectation is that I just come in and do it. So that's been something that even to this day, I have to catch myself. But I'm in a better position now than I was when I started about 3 years ago, for sure.
Interesting. So then aside from numbers like that, and aside from like revenue or growth, what's one deeply personal metric you'd love your legacy to be measured by?
Oh, I would say a personal metric would be the speed of response. What I mean by that is, I think most people know, especially in a leadership position, we have a framework for how to do things effectively. More and more, we're understanding that a lot of it has to do with our mindset and especially where we're at, what emotional state we're at when we're interacting with people that depend on us to lead them. So I would say for me, in my journey to be less reactive, the quickness of my response emotionally is kind of the metric that I use. If in my mind I'm triggered by something, whether it's something someone said or an outcome that happened, how quickly can I get into that mental and emotional state so that I can respond in a way that doesn't create a lot of resistance, but a sense of collaboration? So I think one time Tony Robbins talked about it in the scope of relationships. And he talks about it, like with your spouse, there's like a 90-second rule, I think, where you give yourselves 90 seconds to tell what you're feeling. And then after that, it stops. And that's not the same thing I'm thinking of, but this idea that if we can shorten the amount of time it takes us to respond, and if we do that repeatedly, then it just becomes a subconscious thing for us. So the legacy part is that people can say, you know what, when I went to Tom with an issue, I could trust that he wasn't going to blow up, or I felt like I could go to him. I felt like I could go to Tom with an issue. I knew that he would be receptive. That's the legacy for me that's important, not just in the workplace, but personally. So I measure it in how long it takes for me to respond.
Interesting. So you want to respond quickly, but not reactively? Is that what you mean?
Internally, I want to go through the mental hoops.
Yeah.
And the more we do it, the quicker and the more natural it is. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But usually when something happens, I might just sit there and think for a moment, and I'm going through the mental hoops, and it's a series of asking certain questions and having certain references. Okay, remember, Tom, that you gotta, but that happens like in split seconds.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about what you're saying, and the first thing that comes to mind is this. And sometimes I'll openly go through that process with the person that I'm speaking to so that they can see my process of how I think through things as well. But at the end of the day, it's to try and minimize that.
I've kind of been seeing that right now throughout these questions we've been having. What questions do you ask yourself, though, throughout that process?
One question I ask is, if it's a question someone comes with, why are they asking me this question? Or it might be, I don't have all the information yet. What information do I still need before I respond? And that gets me instantly in question asking mode. And I can do that verbally. So what information don't I have? And that's one. What do I know about this person, or what patterns have I seen that can give me some of that information? What have we seen in the past about this particular problem? Or a lot of it revolves around, what information don't I have? What information do I need? Where else do I need to look? Things like that.
Gotcha. Interesting. Thank you for letting us get into the mind of Tom. It's nice.
I feel especially vulnerable right now. Thanks a lot.
No, it's really interesting. So then, last question, fast forward 5 years from today. What's one big, bold achievement you dream of accomplishing at Ohana Dental Implants, and how do you envision patients and your team talking differently about the practice because of it?
So about 3 years ago, we went through a change in our brand. We used to be known as Grand Valley Dentures and Implants. And Dr. Siona, with his Polynesian heritage, wanted to create a brand that really embodied the spirit of what we do. We've used the name Ohana Dental Implant Centers. So a lot of people associate Ohana with things that are recognized culturally in the Polynesian culture as family, as a sense of community, standing up for each other, being there for each other. That's difficult to do in the healthcare industry when there's so much out there that can potentially create distrust. You see dental practice is flocking to implants because of the value. Practices have been able to go night and day and the value that they can create, revenue, profitability from getting into dental implants away from the traditional. But that sometimes comes with a cost. And our philosophy is we want to treat our patients to live up to the name. So when people can talk about us in a way that really expresses what Ohana means, that's going to be the biggest measure of how successful we've been. If we have a patient come back and say, do you know what? Ohana, that's such a contradiction to what my experience was. You can really pick apart trust easily with an experience like that. And not every patient's going to have the ultimate experience that they're expecting. But at the end of the day, if a patient knows that we did everything we could with the resources we have to give them what they paid for, if they can talk about, when I was there, I felt this way. When I was there, I could tell that they cared. And when that buzz builds around us, and that's what we're recognized for, that would be the measure of our success. And more importantly, not just my success, not just the team's success, but there's something inherent in Dr. Siona's. For me, it's one thing to say Ohana means family or Ohana means commitment. But this is something very personal for Dr. Siona because of his heritage and his background. And there are things that he could share that I wouldn't be able to. So I've got to be mindful of that. This isn't just about a brand. This is about a legacy for him, too.
Awesome, Tom. Thank you so much. This has been incredibly insightful. You've emphasized the power of clear insights and knowing your numbers. And I want to remind listeners that CallRail makes gaining that clarity incredibly easy. So if you're serious about growing your practice smartly and confidently, do yourself a favor and check out callrail.com. No guesswork, just results. Tom, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure. But before we say goodbye, if anyone has any questions or concerns, where can they reach out to you?
You can reach out to us on our website. We have a contact form there. The website's ohanadentalimplants.com.
Awesome. So all that information is going to be in the show notes below. Tom, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure, and we'll hear from you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, real quick, before we wrap up, if there's one thing you take away from today's episode, it's this. You can't improve what you can't see. And that's exactly what CallRail gives you. Total visibility into your calls, leads, and patient conversations. So you know exactly what's working and where you're leaving money on the table. It's not just about tracking calls. It's about uncovering the patterns that either fill your schedule or keep it empty. And with their free guidance on your own metrics, you'll leave that trial knowing exactly how to book more of the right patients. They coach you. So do yourself a favor. Start your free 14-day trial of CallRail today. Get your guidance session, your coaching session, and your onboarding session all in one and see your numbers in a whole new way. Go to callrail.com, or you can go in the show notes below and click on the first link in the show notes below to check out more. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in on the next episode.